Lesson 28. Please open your purple workbooks to page 57. Our learning target today is I can solve word problems with line plots. Today we're going to be working with line plots. A line plot is like a number line. You're going to mark data with an X on a line plot. You will determine the end points of a line plot based on the numbers you are plotting, the smallest number and the largest number. This will all make more sense when we start to work with the data table in your problem set book. If you look at the table in your problem set book, you see that it shows the distance that Miss Smith's fourth graders were able to run before stopping for a rest. If we look at the data, we see the student names on the left-hand side and then the distance they ran as a mixed number on the right-hand side. So if you look there, you can see that some of the fractions have different denominators. When we plot these points, we're going to want to find a common denominator so that we can have the same points on our number line. So if you look, you can see that all of our denominators are factors of 8. So we can create common denominators using the number 8. Looking at your table, we can convert all of our fractions that don't already have a denominator of 8 by finding a common denominator. To get from 2 to 8, we need to multiply by 4. So we have to do the same thing to our numerator. So we take 1 times 4 equals 4. Our new number is 2 4/8. I did the same thing for Ariana with 3/4. I converted it to 6/8. Same thing with 1/4 converted to 2/8, and 2/4 converted to 4/8. Now all of my data has a common denominator, so we can plot it. When you create your line plot, you need to think of what your endpoints will be. You can see here that I chose the endpoints 0 and 3, because if you look at the data, our smallest fraction is 5/8. So 0 is a good starting point. And our largest fraction is 2 5/8. So I round up to 3. So 0 and 3 are my endpoints. Always find your smallest number and your largest number when creating your endpoints. Now you will notice that I created 8 units in between each whole number because we are working with eighths. So let's start plotting our points. If we start with Joe, his mixed number is 2 4/8. So I'm going to go to 2 and count 1, 2, 3, 4, and that is where I will plot Joe. Notice I put an X over the 2 4/8 mark. Next I'll go to Ariana. She ran 1 6/8 of a mile. So I go to 1 6/8, and I put an X over that point. Now I just keep moving down the line. So Bobby was 2 1/8. Morgan, 1 5/8. 2 5/8. 2 1/4, which we converted to 2 2/8. 2 4/8. 5/8. 2 2/8. So now there's already an X there. If that is the case, you just put another one on top of that X. And then 2 4/8. Same thing. You just put an X on top of the one that's already there. Now we have plotted all of our data points. Now we will use our data table and our line plot to answer the problems for question 2. I want you to try these on your own now, and then I will have the answers posted. So pause your video and answer these questions, and then I'll go through them next. let's go through the problems in 2. 2A asks, who ran farther than Jenny? So we first need to go, who ran a mile farther than Jenny? We first go to Jenny and we see that she ran 5/8 of a mile. So we need to add 1 mile to that to get 1 5/8 mile. If you look through the chart, you can see that Morgan ran 1 5/8 of a mile. So the answer is Morgan. The next question says, who ran a mile less than Jack? So first we go over to Jack and we see that he ran 2 5/8 of a mile. So if we subtract 1, it would be 1 5/8 of a mile. And if we go up, we see that that is what Morgan ran. So B is also Morgan. C says 2 students ran exactly 2 1/4 of a mile. Identify the students. How many quarter miles did each student run? So our first step here is just finding out who ran 2 1/4 miles. So we see that Sasha ran 2 1/4, and then we also see that Anson ran 2 2/8. If we simplified that, you could simplify 2/8 to 1/4, and that would be an equivalent fraction. So we know that Anson and Sasha ran 2 1/4 miles. Then it asks, how many quarter miles did each student run? So that means how many 1/4 did each student run? Well, if we look at 2 and we broke that down using a number bond, we could break it into 4/4 and 4/4 to represent the number 2. So that together equals 8/4, and then we have the 1/4 left over. So 8/4 plus 1/4 equals 9/4. So they ran 9 quarter miles. D, what is the difference in miles between the longest and shortest distance run? The longest distance is 2 5/8 of a mile, and the shortest distance is 5/8 of a mile. So when we subtract those, we get 2 miles. E says compare the distance run by Ariana and Morgan using greater than, less than, or equal to. So first we find out how far Ariana ran. So we come over to her name and we see that she ran 1 3/4 of a mile. Then we see how far Morgan ran. Morgan ran 1 5/8. So if we were to compare these, we could find a common denominator. We know that 4 goes into 8, so 8 would be our common denominator. To get to 8, we take 4 times 2, so we have to do the same thing to our numerator. 3 times 2 is 6. So 6/8 is greater than 5/8. So 1 3/4 is greater than 1 5/8. F says Miss Smith ran twice as far as Jenny. How far did Miss Smith run? Write her distance as a mixed number. So if we know that Jenny ran 5/8 of a mile, then we need to take that number, and we see that Miss Smith ran twice as far. So we add it. So it's the same as multiplying it by 2. So 5/8 plus 5/8 equals 10/8. Remember, when we're adding fractions, our denominator stays the same. So when we add 5/8 plus 5/8, we get 10/8, which as a mixed number would be 1 2/8. We would simplify it to 1 1/4. G says Mr. Reynolds ran 1 3/10 of a mile. Use greater than, less than, or equal to compare the distance that Mr. Reynolds ran to the distance that Miss Smith ran. Who ran farther? So we take Miss Smith's distance of 1 1/4 and Mr. Reynolds' distance of 1 3/10, and we compare them. If we were to find a common denominator for this problem, our common denominator would be 40. To get to 40, we take 10 times 4, so we have to do the same thing to our numerator. 3 times 4 is 12. We take 4 times 10, we do the same thing to our numerator. 1 times 10 is 10. We know that 12/40 is greater than 10/40, so 1 3/10 is greater than 1 1/4. The second part of the question says, who ran farther? Well, Mr. Reynolds is the one who ran 1 3/10 of a mile, so Mr. Reynolds ran farther. Make sure you have all of these corrected on your page if you got any wrong.